All right. Hi, everybody. It's our CFB Talk 195. It's Tuesday night. This is when we like to talk to you about everything going on in college football. My name is Bobak Ha'Eri. Unlike last week, made sure to unmute as soon as it began. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit the reply that lets you know how to join the conversation. If you'd like to talk about anything in college football, feel free to hit request from the Twitter app, the X app, and we'll get you up here and we'll talk about whatever it is you'd like to talk about in college football. I see that thumbs up from Ski Masks Murphy. Last week, he was one of the guys who let me know that it was muted when we began. I think that's just sort of the hiccup of starting with video for the first time in the last couple of weeks. So, lots of things going on. I always tell myself it's May. This is typically the off season. I've got some gray hairs, so historically, this has always been the dead time. But this has been one of the, if not the most interesting off seasons, just for changes that are going to be coming to the sport. A sport that I know all of us enjoy, if not love, and I know I love it. So we'll get to some of the more meatier things, which are the settlement discussions that kind of have come to a head in the past week on the House settlement. And I'll get to that. My background is I'm an attorney, although I don't necessarily specialize in antitrust law. I've read over the settlement writings and I can kind of glean what's going on here. And we'll get to that in a moment. But I think we'll start with just a couple of lighter items. But if you want to join, again, hit request. We'll let you up here. We can talk about whatever it is you want to talk about, which we do here on Tuesday nights here on our CFB Talk 195. So one quick note, even though it's not really football, but he was probably one of the biggest boosters of the Pac-8, the Pac-10, the Pac-12. Bill Walton, rest in peace, my man. He died at age 71. Such an interesting life. If you've never sat down and read about what his life has been like, go and read one of the obituaries, one of the better ones. Just kind of read all the in-depth stuff that he did because he was fascinating on the court, off the court, just a quote machine. And some of the things that I've seen on X from the people that worked with him have been spectacular. And he was exactly the guy you saw is the guy you got. And that's always something that I appreciate and something that, I aspire to in my own life. But before we get to some of the meatier things, some of the other stories, and sorry to start with downers. Uh, you know, uh, Unfortunately, Brian Batty, who of course was the Auburn player who was shot, we had a little more information come up about his status. Obviously, his brother died in the shooting that occurred, and apparently, the prognosis for him, if he is to pull through, is permanent paralysis, which is just an absolute tragedy. I just wanted to voice my concerns for that, and I hope that isn't the case. There's lots of developments going on in medicine. We hope that he feels better. Let's see here. Ski Mask, Smurfy, you're up here. What's going on?
Can you hear me?
I can.
Great. Yeah, just as you said before, this college football offseason has been very, very active and interesting. Seems like the shape of college football is moving towards the future. But I guess he disappeared. But I swear I just saw Matt Brown in here
Yeah,
because I
he was
had
here for a
questions.
moment. I saw him too.
I, 'Cause I had questions for him because he's the person. I was like, oh, Matt Brown's here. This is the person you got to talk to. I need to know everything about the game because he seems to have made it himself at this point. But now
And
he's
it's interesting. I got to say, last week we had Andy Staples do an AMA, and we had to move it forward because I know he and a lot of other reporters. I think Chris Vanini. I saw pictures of him at EA Orlando because that's the department that's making it. And by the way, I forgot to say, EA Orlando's office.
kept
They're the
around.
people that were making the NCAA game before. In fact, they've been making it forever under different names, and then they kind of renamed them, rebranded them EA Orlando. But yeah, so or EA, pardon me, Tiburon,
Kept
but they're
around.
based in
They're
Orlando. So
Orlando
yeah, no,
and
I know Vanini
Jacksonville, I
was
think.
down there. I know Staples was definitely down there because we had to move the AMA so he could make it out there. So I think now they're finally opening the gates a little bit to covering for the press because that was the problem. It was so hard to find out info on the game and man, Matt Brown, he was on top of it, and yeah, I saw him briefly here, and yeah, I admire his work. His dedication to that video game is by far and away the runaway number one here in the college football world.
Yeah, and if you didn't know, like he was like a serious reporter who does like all kinds of sports reporting. You would
Oh
think
yeah,
no, he's his only job is looking out for this game because of how well he's done with going through all the information and being like, no, 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 this is what they said, this is what they haven't said, and like downplaying a lot of speculation, especially with the whole expectation of a commercial during the college football playoff. He was one person who's like, no one said that at EA, but everyone's like, no, Matt, you're wrong. And then lo and behold, he's right.
Yeah, I agree. And he's been very good with using Freedom of Information Act, FOIA requests to try and get stuff back in the, over the last year to kind of gather information on it because, again, public universities had to kind of reveal some of that stuff to those requests. And yeah, the Extra Points newsletter is his thing. I always say that because there's two Matt Browns of pretty decent notoriety in college football. So he's the Extra Points guy if you're ever looking for the insight on the game. A couple of other things I just wanted to mention. And again, if any of you want to join the conversation on any topic in college football, please feel free to hit request. We can talk about whatever. There's lots of things. As was noted this past week, the Pac-12 network broadcast its final live event and signed off. Now, that isn't the total end for the Pac-12 network. We kind of briefly talked about it last week. They're kind of going mercenary now. Like if you need events, because they have all that equipment. They built all those studios. They have all that equipment. Apparently now they're going to be someone you can hire for events. So maybe ESPN Plus. Gosh knows the quality of those events can be pretty low. So they could use that. Maybe you can hire it for, your wedding. I don't know. But that's good. On a related note, and again, we'll see where this goes. But there was a report in this last week that the Pac 12 gave former commissioner Larry Scott a $1.86 million interest-free loan for his house in 2009. And he hasn't paid back any of it as of last year. It's due in full in June, so next month. So, there you go. Gosh knows there's ways organizations have done that for some of their executives. But especially given what happened to the Pac 12 and given the fact that Larry Scott deserves an incredible amount of the blame for it, that isn't a good look. We'll see where that goes. I know there's a lot of Schadenfreude if that turns into something negative for him. On a positive note, we're apparently going to get college football on TNT. So the college football, the first round and quarterfinal games for the new college football playoff, which again, we've got multiple rounds. You've got the first round, you've got the quarters, semis, and the finals. We're going to have TNT is going to broadcast some of them. Now, for those who weren't aware, ESPN actually had all the rights to the college football playoff. But as soon as that deal was announced several months ago, they said that everyone announced the option is there to sublicense, which is like sublicense these to other broadcasters who might be interested. So apparently TNT is the first one to sign on. I mean, they could give it to Fox, they could give it to whoever. I mean, money is money. They're gonna take it, right? So that'll be interesting. Of course, the commentary there is imagine if Shaq and Chuck are on that show. Could you imagine like Shaq and Chuck giving analysis on college football playoff? I don't even care if they know anything about the teams. Of course, if Auburn's there, Barkley's going to be on top of that. But Ski Mask, I see your hand up, and then I'll get Rock Chalk up here as well.
Yeah, I was going to say the inside NBA TV crew, if they're allowed to talk about college football, all I'm going to say is every university in Texas would have to hold on tight because Charles Barkley has said some of the most disrespectful things I've
Could you
ever heard in
imagine
sports
UTSA?
commentator say.
If UTSA becomes
It's always about a city in Texas.
now, I want that to happen. I want them to announce that Barkley's going to be on one of these college football broadcasts, and then I want UTSA to be the G5 champ that makes it in, because that would just that'll write itself.
And then Shaq just egging him on perfectly every time. What else, Chuck? What else? And like it's you, their brand of commentary, you just can't recreate it, which is perfect. But also, I was gonna comment on how sort of like this weird bidding war for rights to NBA sort of trickling down and like sort of maybe being a benefit to college football, something I didn't foresee. Because I believe in terms of that bidding war for NBA games, it was NBC, TNT, and Amazon. And that sort of made me think, well, yeah, that probably explains why no one's putting up a huge bidding war for the college football playoff, because it was all like, we're going to get these NBA games. That's where the money's going to go. And so, like, seeing how that trickled down to college football is pretty interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. NBA is an international phenomenon. I mean, the money there is just I mean, because obviously NFL in the United States, the NFL is king, but worldwide, man, you could go just about anywhere and talk NBA. That is just, it's something else. Rock Chalk Sports Talk? What's going on? Thanks for joining us.
Hey, man, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I'm doing all right. Hey, so we were talking about Pac-12 teams a little bit earlier. I want to stick with the Pac-12 team who's now in the Big 12, which is Utah. I saw some rumors floating around that Utah maybe wants out of the Big 12 without even playing anything in the Big 12, and they're looking towards the ACC. But in my opinion, I think the ACC might be next up on the chopping block in terms of conferences who are about to go down. So does Utah know something that we don't, or is it just kind of arrogance, I guess, getting in the way? I don't know what their thought process is there.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because that was in something I'd be happy to talk about. So a rumor erupted over, gosh, what was that? Like a couple of days ago on the 25th. So the reporter that dropped this rumor, at least the most notable reporter, is a guy named Dick Weiss. Now, some people may not be familiar with him. He's been reporting for a long time, but he's a legit reporter. In fact, just a crazy coincidence. Last January, I sat next to him in the press box at NRG Stadium for the Michigan Washington National Championship game. He's one of the most he's a guy who's been doing this forever, has won all the awards, and he's one of the most earnest guys you'll ever meet. Like I actually kind of had never heard of him really before because he's a little before my time, and he was a reporter on the East Coast, mostly doing the NBA. And yeah, no, I told a friend, like, yeah, I'm sitting next to a guy named Dick Weiss. He's a really good guy. He's like, that guy's like a legend. And I'm like, wow, really? So I just want to say that only because coming from him, it was a little bit more than just some random account. I mean, he's on Twitter, but he's from long before Twitter. He looks a little older than even his Twitter image. Let me just put it that way. But he dropped a tweet, and I'm just going to read it to put everyone on the same page. Speculation is circulating about potential shifts in college sports conferences. There's discussion about Utah possibly moving to the ACC despite its recent move to the Big 12, with some suggesting the ACC might be a better fit due to its ESPN network agreement and potential for increased TV value. However, skepticism exists regarding the stability and attractiveness of the ACC compared with the Big 12. And that's something that Rock Chalk Sports Talk brought up. I mean, of all the P4, the ACC almost certainly looks the shakiest of them all. Now, Brett McMurphy just today, well, it was a statement from the ACC, but he was happy to regurgitate it. The ACC stated, "We are proud to be entering into membership with the Big 12 Conference." A statement from Utah regarding the ACC. Boy, man, it's tired. I'm a little tired at night. Apologize. We are proud to be entering membership in the Big 12 Conference in the coming months and excited to be joining our new colleagues and member institutions. A report of the weekend that suggested otherwise is completely fabricated and irresponsible. So this is one of those situations where we could say, oh yeah, that's every time you totally buy one side, one of these arguments, it ends up the other side has a secret that they reveal to us. So I'm going to be a little hesitant to say like that's the end of it. But what we do know is historically Utah had talked to the ACC when they were kind of apparently shopping around before they settled with their border conference mates and decided to settle into the Big 12, which by far seems like a better fit. I have made no secret of my admiration of Brett Yormark. He absolutely knows what he's doing, and he was probably the best hire of all the new conference commissioners, and really helped the Big 12 survive. A year ago, I was the one joking about this is a knife fight between the Pac-12 and the Big 12 to see who's going to survive all of this, and the Pac-12 lost because the Big 12 pulled the trigger on that media deal way before the Pac-12 even had its ducks in a row. And that set up the stage for their survival in all of this. So going to Utah, I mean, I would be shocked if they went to the ACC. I wonder if there was some lingering questions there. Maybe a few people who are disgruntled, but yeah, I agree. I think I'm with you. I don't think Utah is seriously looking at the ACC anymore. Certainly of the two conferences, they're the ones that are literally in the middle of a slow process of tearing itself apart with the lawsuit that Florida State has filed. So it's not even like a rumor. They are literally kind of in the middle of it. So I agree with you, man. I mean, I think the Big 12 is better off. I mean, what do you think? I mean, you're obviously, I assume you guys cover a lot of Kansas I mean, this has got to be a lot more confident for Kansas fans. I mean, I remember, and I'm sure you do too, around was it 2011 when Colorado left and Nebraska left, and it looked like, oh my gosh, is Texas and like four schools along with it was like Oklahoma State, and maybe Texas Tech were going to go to the Pac-12, and it was like, well, what's going to happen to the teams that are left? And Kansas was one of them, but this is completely like this is 180 from those days.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, obviously, yeah, Texas A&M, Mizzou, Colorado, and Nebraska all jumped ship with the Big 12, but the Big 12 ended up being fine. They added in TCU, and a lot of people they added in TCU and
West Virginia.
Yeah, I don't know why I couldn't think of it. Mm-hmm. But obviously, they were, at least TCU was a smaller market team, and then now they went to the college football playoff. They went to the national championship a couple years ago. So I know in the Big 12, there was worry about, we're letting in UCF and Cincinnati and Houston, sort of these group of 5 schools. But, I mean, it's been kind of proven with, like, TCU that if you get into a big boy conference, all of a sudden you get more resources. And with more resources, you get more money and you get more recruits. So, I mean, it's sort of the snowball effect with these group of 5. But I think people have kind of forgotten that, and there's a general worry of the Big 12 is not going to be as strong or as powerful as it once was in the past.
I mean, it's interesting to look at now. I mean, when we look at the G5, there's a lot of perception that heading into this upcoming season, they're weaker than before. And I mean, part of the reason is the Big 12 poached all the top teams that were really contenders there. Now, there are still contenders. And I mean, yeah, okay, I know Liberty kind of, again, I'm not going to get into Liberty. I got why they made it where they did. Even before the season, we knew the schedule was really weak. And Jamie Chadwell is an incredible coach. So I'm just going to set that aside. But now SMU was the other great one, and now they're in the ACC. So I think the Big 12 benefited from getting the first dibs on some of those teams that were interested in moving up and had the wherewithal to move up. And I mean, now, again, don't get me wrong. I think the G5 will eventually build itself up. There's some good teams that are still there that could, Tulane's still out there. UTSA is still out there. USF, by the way, credit to USF. I've said this over the years at this point. They are the most organized at building a stadium that any school I've ever seen. Like every few months. And in fact, because this last week it came up again, they say something that like, we're thinking about building an on-campus stadium. Oh, by the way, we've decided to pick between these 2 sites. And 3 months later, we've picked this site. 5 months later, we've got a design. 6 months later, you know what? So they've been doing this now for a couple of years. And once again, they just passed another, one of these benchmarks. So that stadium on campus is coming up. Only reason why, if USF can kind of get itself organized like UCF did, they're also going to be another one of these programs that we're going to see on the rise. Especially for those of us who were very much involved in the 2007 season. We remember that brief moment where USF was the number 2 team in the country in the BCS poll. So they've done it before, and this would be
Kansas was too.
Huh?
Kansas was number 2 in that.
Oh yeah, that was a crazy season. Cal was number 2. It was kind of like number 2 was the drummer of Spinal Tap that season, because there was like 3 weeks in a row where they just got absolutely wrecked. Oh my goodness. Well, before, I just want to bring up a couple of other topics since we've been kind of hitting on some of this stuff. Kind of going a little bit out of college football, but hey. How amazing is that? Could it be that one of Nick Saban's last collegiate national champions he ever coached was Tyler Buchner, who decided to go back to Notre Dame immediately after the season and win a national championship in lacrosse? So, as pointed out by Matt Fortuna, great guy. I've sat next to him in a couple of games, and he's come and done an AMA on our CFB. Notre Dame's last 2 football game MVPs, including Tyler Buchner, are now lacrosse national champions. So there you go. I mean, there's obviously there's been some great. I'm trying to think. Oh gosh, Brown. What was his first name at Syracuse? Jim Brown. Yeah, he just passed away. Also a great lacrosse player as well. So there's a lot of history, a lot of crossover in the 2 sports. Going back all the way to the 50s. Another thing I just wanted to note, because college football is all sorts of levels. Apparently, Marymount of Virginia has won the Atlantic East title for flag football, which was the first ever NCAA title for varsity flag. Now, flag football is a fascinating sport. Those of you may be aware, the Olympics in Los Angeles are going to have it as a medal sport. It has spread like wildfire internationally because it doesn't involve tackling, doesn't involve expensive equipment. That's actually a huge point when you think about how expensive it is to run an American football team. I'm so used to dealing with folks now in Japan. And the fact that women can do it a lot easily, they can just adapt it. So it's actually taken off internationally as a women's sport, which is absolutely fascinating, and it has so far in the United States as well. So we're going to see flag football as an Olympic sport. That's wonderful. Maybe one day we'll see tackle. It's hard to bring that one up only because the United States will still roll over everybody in that sport. But flag football, we found a lot more evenness in that sport, and it's one that, if it gets more people interested in football, awesome. The NFL has been very good about pushing this internationally because the more people you get in the football, the more they'll watch football, and those guys are masters at getting all the money that you can squeeze out of this stuff. Oh my goodness. So, and just want to say, Lewis Johnson, I just saw your comment. You're absolutely right. James Madison is one of those teams that could be a G5 champion. They are out there. We'll see. I think they'll adapt to this coaching change pretty well. They have an incredible AD who's retiring, who is responsible for why they were able to hit FBS running the way they did. Ski Masks Murphy, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to get to another fun story before we got to the meat and potatoes of these lawsuits. It seems like once again in college football, it happened last week, and I didn't bring it up, but it seems like we've had another brisket gate incident in college football with BYU, and they were showing off their brisket out of their new smoker, and if you saw the photo, it looked extremely dry, and so like they caught a lot of flack for it, and then immediately deleted it. And I just think, is that like just something that's just gonna become like the new thing in college football, is that every team just has to roll out a very bad brisket and have to delete the photo, and then everyone just like, wait, did that really happen? I think we're gonna get it like a yearly or every other year brisket gate, because I remember the Lincoln Riley.
Yeah, the Lincoln Riley incident is something else, and we
level.
at our CFB have a strong personal connection to the Lincoln Riley brisket. I'll give you all a quick story here because this really did happen. I didn't even make the joke. So this Twitter account is run by several people. We're all volunteers, all that stuff. But one of those guys tweeted a very innocent joke about that brisket because we know there's a line. Like personally, I went to Catholic high school. I used to write plays. There's always a line you didn't cross with the administration. So we're always good about knowing where that line is for the most part. So innocent joke. We got blocked. So, wow, okay, all right. Kind of had a little bit of jokes from that. So last summer, one of our reporters was at Pac-12 Media Day, ended up by chance sitting at a table with Lincoln Riley and kind of explained the story to the humor of the other reporters at the table. So Lincoln Riley literally told him, like, all right, well, what would you like? Would you like me to unblock you? And he went off, came back and unblocked us. So that was a weird story there. I thought it was kind of funny. But yeah, no, I think the funniest thing would be to kind of antagonize people on this, only because, again, I grew up in Southern California. I grew up in the age of, Crocodile Dundee. Why am I bringing that up? Putting a shrimp on the Barbie, all that thing, the cliche Aussie thing to say means you put it on the grill. So I'm used to barbecue and grill being fairly synonymous, which absolutely is not the case. I know that. I mean, even in California, we got tri-tip, which is more of a traditional barbecue, low and slow. Santa Rosa area. It's excellent. If you can go out to Santa Rosa, it's kind of on the way between Santa Barbara and San Luis Obispo. Absolutely get some tri-tip over there. It's fantastic. But yeah, no. So I would love to do that to antagonize people. Just we're gonna grill this steak and then show it on a grill. That would be, or barbecue the steak and show it on a grill. But Rock Chalk Sports Talk, what's going on? I see your hand up.
Yeah, I had a quick question. I actually saw you guys tweeted this out about the infamous Texas A&M Jimbo Fisher plaque. It wound up at a place called, I believe, Dirty Martinis. Do you think that's the real plaque?
I'm not sure. I didn't tweet that one, but I saw it was so funny. It somehow got posted on the main website of our CFB, which I was even more humored by. I'm like, oh my gosh, we're now becoming we're eating our own tail and becoming our own source of content. But I looked a little bit at that image. I think it was a joke, but I don't know. Some people said they were going to go and see it. I haven't followed up on it, but it was pretty funny to see that infamous trophy, so to speak.
Yeah, no, that was just hilarious. I mean, the moment that they came out with that, I was like, oh, this could be a bad look in the future, and it certainly was. So
Well, the
I just didn't know
really
how they would
famous
have
one
got
that
their
I
hands on it.
think of was right after Virginia Tech fell short of the national championship, and that was what, 99. And with Vic as a quarterback, excellent, just amazing team to watch. But they put an empty trophy case in Lane Stadium or somewhere in the Virginia Tech athletic department to kind of say, like, for their future national championship trophy. They quietly removed it, I think, around the time that Coach Beamer retired. So, yeah, sometimes those things don't go so well. But there was precedent going back even a little bit before on that particular one. One other quick a couple other quick news and notes. So UC Berkeley, aka Cal. Why do they go by Cal? Because they're the original UC system school. Davis was originally called the UC Farm. UCLA was called the University of California Southern Branch. So they're the mothership of all of the campuses, but they've always had kind of a love-hate relationship with their name in athletics because the University of California, Berkeley, they go by, UC Berkeley, Cal Berkeley. They were trying to rebrand and get away from Cal, but that got a lot of pushback from alumni. That kind of cursive script Cal was always a popular one. So now apparently they're going to still keep Cal as athletics, Berkeley as academics, and now they're using a B, a yellow B on a blue background. Now, I grew up in the armpit of the state of California. Not a whole lot to brag about, other than the fact that I survived and served 15 years and left and made it out. Bakersfield starts with a B. We have Cal State Bakersfield, CSUB. I think there should be a lawsuit over that, only for the beauty of watching Cal State Bakersfield sue UC Berkeley over the use of that B. But that's just me. That's just one of my light editorial humor there. Another thing that's going on right now is the SEC spring meetings. So the ACC spring meetings were last week. That was its own kettle of fish. Lots of fun stories coming out of there. And what was that going to happen? But now it is the SEC. So we had kind of some mutual love from Texas and Texas A&M to be back in the same conference. Brett McMurphy, again, he's always good on being on top of these things. Great guy in person, I got to say. Really enjoys college football, and he's got kind of a nice cynicism that warms my Gen X heart. So Texas's Steve Sarkisian, on joining A&M in the SEC, he was quoted as saying, "There is so much talk about realignment. For us, we gained two rivals back. We're playing Arkansas and Texas A&M again. We're looking forward to it." Talking about A&M, and I'm sure they are too. And that is a great point. Arkansas is a great historic rival of Texas. The games that there were a couple of games in the late 60s that Richard Nixon saw. He one of them in person, and he declared it the game of the century after he saw it, because Nixon was a huge fan of college football. So anyway, that's one of those traditional rivalries that's coming back. And then also Texas A&M coach Mike Elko on Texas. We should play them when you have two programs like that in the same state, 2 hours away. They should play each other every year, and it should mean a lot. Not quite as affirming as Steve Sarkisian's statement, but whatever. Steve is a little bit better. He's a bit of a smoother talker, so to speak. But as some folks have said, I'm going to just credit West Virginia fans, said admirable. It's always nice when realignment brings rivalries back, but it has already destroyed some. So I have a feeling more are going to be broken. But hey, a broken clock, right? A couple of times a day. Here we go. Also from SEC spring meetings, Commissioner Greg Sankey, he just went on record as saying, "I don't expect a lot of conversation on expanding the SEC schedule to 9 games anytime soon because they are currently at 8 games, and the schedules are done for the next 2 seasons." So that's been a big kind of discussion whether or not the SEC is going to add an extra conference game like some of the others. And another point of discussion is whether or not rule changes are going to force them to report injuries on a regular basis. Now, this one's interesting because it kind of goes into sort of gambling world and some of the kind of the dark side of it that's been coming out. But we'll see where that goes on injury reporting. That seems to be one of those stories that we're going to kind of see develop out. And it's so funny. I kind of got to look around my phone. I wish this thing would operate on my PC, but you got to use your phone. And I have to use vertical, which I hate. I prefer landscape. But when they kind of launched the video on Twitter Spaces, if you turn it sideways, it actually blocks the ability of the host to see anybody. So it becomes impossible for me to use. So that's why we're doing vertical video. I'm not a fan of it, but there you go. All right. So, now, I see someone's got their hand up, and then we can dive into the settlement because this is something prep for. Let's see here. Big Ten backers. I'll go ahead and let you up here as well. And then would love to hear from you and hear what you're thinking. So Big Ten backers, what's going on?
What is up, ladies and gentlemen? I just want to know, you mentioned sports betting, and I thought sports betting may possibly increase viewership to college football. What do you think?
I think it has to some extent. I mean, it certainly pulls in casual viewers. People who might want to drop a short bet, they want to watch the game, maybe see a little bit of it. I think that's certainly part of it. I think it's kind of a, it's got its pluses, it's got its minuses. As of right now, I'm still on the vote that it's got more pluses than minuses. So I think, yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. The casual fan, I mean, the NFL world is comprised of people that want to bet. They want to put their money down. They want to see what they're going to get. And I think college football is about to hit a piece of that market.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's been doing well so far. I think some of the things made sense. Like, I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know if they have restricted prop bets. I know that was also the big thing coming out of that. I know NCAA President Charlie Baker, that's one of his big points to make. But I think overall, betting is here to stay, at least I haven't seen anything that makes it worrisome at this point. I mean, there are so many teams, so many players, but college football has always been a sport that always felt a little bit harder to game as compared to basketball, because again, it's such a big team effort that it's a little harder to mess with the score as much. I just saw a couple of the reply. By the way, Ski Master Murphy, if you haven't seen it, we were talking about that brisket that BYU tweeted and then deleted. He has put that in the replies with a screenshot since they had deleted it. So enjoy that rather well done brisket in the images. And I just wanted to hit Landon Smith. How do you think the Big 12 will do in 2024? And who do you think will win it? Boy, that is like the toughest. They are the best, at least the most evenly matched, I'd say, top to bottom conference right now. It's the hardest one to predict is the Big 12. And now, first of all, let me just say this, and I say this repeatedly every week because I think we're going to see a lot of casual, we're just talking about casual fans, a lot of casual fans or fans who are college football fans in the fall, which is fine. I'm a college basketball fan for like 2 weeks, so I get it. But for those fans heading into this season, they're going to be a little bit surprised when we get to how the new rankings work for the playoff. Because, just as a reminder, the top 4 conference winners get first round buys, and they're seeded 1 through 4. They have to be seeded 1 through 4. So that means, again, we're going to assume the P4 champs all end up a little bit ahead of the G5 champ. But that means you could be ranked in the top 10, ranked even in the top 15, and probably lower. I mean, Liberty was really far down there this last season. And you will still be one of the top 4 seeds if you win your conference. So that could be an AC, probably more likely than not an ACC or Big 12 champ might do that, but it could very well be a top 4 team. Who knows? So that'll be exciting to see. Now, who do I think might win? I think there's 3 teams that get the most discussion right now, and they're all valid, but it could be, quite frankly, there's wild cards out there that are just as plausible. That's how hard this conference is to predict. I think the biggest schools of thought are around K-State, Oklahoma State, because both of them are returning some interesting. Oklahoma State's returning almost the entire team, it feels like. And Ollie Gordon is a hell of a running back. And they've got like a 7th year. I'm not even joking when I say that, a 7th year QB, which, again, the legacy of the COVID years has been something else, right? You've got, again, K-State. They've got a great quarterback, a really interesting one now that the other one transferred to Ohio State. And they brought in that great running back from Colorado. So they're going to be interesting to at least watch on the field. And Chris Kleiman's a great coach. The third one's Utah, only because Utah, if you watch Pac-12 football, you know exactly how they're built. You know they're always going to have a great defense. The big question there, Cam Rising, can he stay healthy? But even if he isn't, they can still be a threat. And Coach Wingham there is absolutely incredible. And then Kansas. How can you not mention Kansas? I mean, Lance Leipold. But once again, it's a question: can the quarterback stay healthy? I mean, there's several teams in this boat where it's like if the quarterback can stay healthy, they're going to be a contender. But for many of them, they're still, and Cam Rising, Kansas, both with Jaden Daniels. Those are two that are going to be a concern only because we care to see how they can last. But really, frankly, I mean, could Deion get Colorado to turn around? Who knows? I mean, you can't doubt that Shedeur Sanders has talent. I mean, they've got if the offensive line can start to be at least modestly better, they could be a challenger. Arizona still has T-Mac, Noah Fafita. Their offense is going to be potent. Can Brent Brennan keep them going? TCU, they had a bad year this past season, but they could turn it around. I mean, there's so many questions. I mean, UCF seems to be the leader in the clubhouse of the new teams that joined last year. KJ Jefferson's a good quarterback. They've got, again, some talent that transferred in, some talent there. Gus Malzahn can coach. So it really is by far the most exciting conference. I mean, Houston too. I mean, I there's so many teams I could mention there. And that's why the Big 12 is one of the toughest ones to call. Ski Mask Smurfy, your hands up. What's up?
Yeah, I was gonna say regarding the Big 12, like you said, it's a shooters gallery of who could possibly be the team that comes out on top. But I think I'm going to agree with one of your early statements in there that the dark horse that I think no one's going to pay attention to because everybody's going to think, oh, okay, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, they're bringing back good teams. Then Kansas has been on the uprise. They'll be good. TCU, they're looking to bounce back. And everyone's eyes, of course, are going to be on Colorado. And if you beat Colorado, you get their eyes. But I think the dark horse that's going to take everyone by surprise is more than likely going to be Utah. So I don't think everyone's been paying attention, what Cal Whittingham has done over like the past 6 or 7 seasons with building a very good Utah program that I think has 2 out of the last 3 Pac championships.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so I think they may just come in and surprise everyone because last season the Pac-12 was the shooters gallery, and they had to deal with Washington, Oregon State, and I think they may come in and just clean house. I think I wouldn't be surprised if that happened, and I think everyone's going to be surprised, and possibly they could make a decent run in the 12-team playoff and sort of give the Big 12 some more legitimacy, and have everyone not thinking they're hanging on by a thread.
Yeah, and I just want to say, Big Ten backer, he pointed out that the Oklahoma State, as I mentioned, they bring back. He found the numbers. It's 10 returners on both sides of the ball. Rock Talk Sports Talk, your hands up, and then we'll get to the guy who actually asked the original question, Landon Smith, who just walked up. But Rock Talk Jayhawk, probably Rock Talk Sports Talk. What's on your mind?
Yeah, I mean, so pretty biased over here, obviously.
A little.
But I mean, Kansas, I mean, you have to look at Kansas and see them as a threat if you're the Utahs and the K-States and the Oklahoma States, because Kansas right now, they're bringing back their 3 top receivers in Luke Grimm, Lawrence Arnold, and Quentin Skinner. They're bringing back one of the best running backs in the nation in Devin Neal. And you look at Devin Neal's backup with Daniel Highshaw, if he's able to stay healthy too, that is one of the best 1-2 punches in the backfield in the nation. And then obviously you have Jalen Daniels. Now, we haven't seen Jalen Daniels for an entire season yet, but I mean, right now it's hard to look at Kansas. And even if I take my fan hat off, if I take my KU sports talk show host off, you still have to look at them and be like, okay, they have a pretty dang good opportunity here, and they had to strike while the iron's hot because you have Jalen Daniels back, because you have all that offensive firepower back, and they have 2 of the best corners in the league in the conference, if not the nation as well. I mean, their defensive line not great, linebacker lost a couple guys, but at the same time, with the offensive firepower that they have, they're going to be in every single game this year. And I mean, if you're buying stock in KU, you better do it now.
Remind me, who did they replace Kotelnicki with?
Jeff Grimes.
That's the offensive coordinator. Sorry, offensive coordinator. For those who don't know who we're talking about, he went to he was hired away by Penn State.
Yeah, they replaced him with Jeff Grimes out of Baylor and BYU.
Yeah, no, that's a good replacement. Yeah, I remember people were there was positive buzz about who they replaced him with, and I just couldn't remember the name. And yes, absolutely, yeah. So yeah, I 100% agree with you. Kansas could be again. I love this conference. It's going to be the most exciting race to watch. Uh, Landon, what's going on? I know you asked this question. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I was gonna say the same. Like, I think so. I just graduated from TCU, and I grew up watching TCU play, and I kind of had this like perfect image of what the Big 12 was, and so all this change is kind of wild. But I think it's easy to forget about the teams that are coming in, like Utah, and so I kind of agree. Like, just with the general like, I think Kansas and Utah are the teams to look out for, and I think Lance Leipold is like even better than people give him credit for. I'm just waiting for them to have like a really really good year.
Yeah, he's phenomenal. He and Kalen DeBoer are two of the best examples of, and actually even Brian Kelly are guys who won at a lower division. And it's like, no, they actually can coach. Watch what they do when you give them a team, and they can build it up. I mean, say what you will about some of the silliness that happens, especially with like Brian Kelly, but the guy can coach ball. What can I say? I just before I kind of, and I see another hand up, and I'll get to you, Joey, as well. There was an interesting kind of comment that this kind of got my brain thinking with all these teams moving around. I think one of the teams that is oddly enough, I'm not going to say they're going to win anything like they're going to win their conference, but I think they've got a player who gets underrated because right now, like for example, I get paid by Advanced Sports Media to do a podcast with one of CBS's reporters, Sanjay Raja. Cultural Pulse Survivor Show. Yeah. But we were just doing this whole series where we're talking with reporters from the ACC and kind of doing a preview of all the teams. And, they were looking at, well, who do you think the best player is going to be in the ACC? And, who's an underrated player? And, some of the best players are easier to spot, or at least the highest profile players, you guys like Cam Ward, et cetera. No one that we've talked to has talked about, I think, the best running back that's going to be the ACC because he's from one of the new teams. Cal has a running back, Jaden Ott, who was the first team all Pac-12 running back, who was just a terror on the ground game. And he's going to be the ACC, but I think he's kind of flying under the radar because everyone in the ACC is used to talking about their traditional teams. Oh, yeah, by the way, we joined, everyone's like, ha, 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 Stanford, Cal are joining. But there's still football teams. They still were in the Pac-12. Financially, Cal is probably the most unsteady team in all of college football, which we could get to in another conversation. But they got a good running back. I just wanted to point that out. So it'll be interesting to see them join in. Let's see here. Joey, what's going on? Hey, Joey, just feel free to unmute.
Oh, yep, I'm here.
I can hear you.
I walked into a Big 12 conversation, so I just wanted to raise my hand and say I'm a Louisville fan, and I want Louisville to be in the Big 12. I think we're a perfect match, and talking about all this conference realignment, I think it'd be a lot of fun to reunite with some old rivalries and create some new ones. And I think the Big 12 is on much better standing than the ACC is right now.
Especially you'd have Cincinnati back in the same conference. It wouldn't have to be anything like a non-conference game. That's one of the. I remember watching those games.
They got Satterfield at Cincinnati now.
Yeah. Oh man, yeah, I absolutely remember those games. Yeah, so that would be an interesting one. And that said, I mean, they are certainly a contender this season in the ACC. I know when we were having fun again with Sanjay Raja, the CBS guy I do that show with, we like a month ago, we said, okay, we know what this new 12-team playoff format has to look like. And so we decided to create, a way too early list of who might be in the playoff. And therefore, you have to pick, again, the top 4 teams had to be teams that were conference champions and presumably P4 champions. Neither of us are willing to say G5 is going to be ranked higher. And his team, one of his ACC champ was Louisville. He decided to go with the dark horse, right? So Louisville was the 4th seed. Yeah, and then that's the crazy thing. Even if Louisville's like ranked 16, they would be the 4th seed and get that first round bye, which was a hell of a thing. I mean, don't get me wrong. I agree that Louisville is still going to be out there. I mean, it's going to be fascinating to see. I think they made an improvement on quarterback because last year was just incredible. Last year, they were almost the TCU of last season in terms of like, wait, a new head coach, and suddenly this team is is challenging. That Pitt game, I still can't explain. Florida State was a close one, but Louisville really got everyone's attention last year.
No, I agree. I'm on message boards and Reddit, and I've always seen the conference realignment stuff, and I'm always on the side of rather than ACC, trying to pluck and plod their way to survive. I just want to see Louisville be proactive and just say, Big 12, take me.
Here's the thing, by the way, before I forget, we were just talking about QBs who we hope they stay healthy. You guys got Tyler Shuck. That's who the name I was trying to remember, because Texas Tech, again, he got injured there. They had a lot of hope on him, and then it just didn't quite work. But if Shuck works out at Louisville, he definitely has a higher ceiling, and that could be tremendous for that team.
I like to hear that.
Yeah, so we'll see. Hopefully. I mean, him, Rising Daniels, there's all these players who are like, just don't break. Just don't break. My goodness. We want to see everyone healthy. We love that. That's part of why we love college football here. I'm going to just take a second because it is one of the big stories that kind of finished out. Well, I'm not going to say finished out, but really kind of ended last week before we went into the holiday. And that's the House settlement. Now, I'll give you all a quick rundown of it. Now, I'll try not to make it too dry. I'm a lawyer by training and background. I teach law as an adjunct at the University of Minnesota, but I can usually put things understandably. But I've said it before, heading into this offseason, that this was the case that, had it gone to trial, could have had the most existential, could have wrecked everything. Because the way it was, a trial like this on the type of charges they were filing, if it had gone to trial, and the NCAA and the conferences lost, not only would they have lost the amount that is requested, but they would have had what's called treble damages, which means it would have been 3 times the amount. Now, if you run any large organization, a nonprofit, but a large nonprofit, I'm talking like the United Way, like things that are huge, right? Or a university, or a big for-profit corporation like, Walmart, medical device company, I don't care, whoever. You want to make sure you corral things at a risk. And the risk that this trial posed was something that everyone involved, everyone who was a defendant, knew could potentially wreck everything. Especially, for example, if you were the NCAA and that judgment came down, you probably have to declare bankruptcy immediately. So instead of potentially paying what could have been over $15 billion or more, you've agreed to pay a portion of a 2.7, I forgot what the exact number is, I apologize. Yeah, $2.7 billion settlement. And not all at once, you've come to an agreement with the plaintiffs to do it over 10 years. So that's more manageable. They can just take some of the money that would have otherwise been earning from the NCAA tournament. That means a little less distribution for everybody, but they can at least keep it all going. That's how the world of legal negotiation works. But I think I want to be clear, this isn't over yet. I think a lot of people are like, oh, all the probably all the major, I guess technically the Pac-12 had to agree. The P5 have all agreed. The NCAA has agreed. It's over. Not so fast, my friend, to steal one of the best lines in college football. It settles 3 antitrust lawsuits that we are in the middle of right now. The House versus NCAA, the Carter versus NCAA, and the Hubbard versus NCAA, at least their proposed settlement. 2 things. It's not a done deal yet, and it doesn't settle prospective lawsuits that may not be part of this suit. I'll get to that in a second. So why do I say it's not a done deal? All that's happened is the plaintiffs handed out a settlement proposal, and it wasn't like all the details settled out. It's like, here's the outline of what we would like from you. If we don't hear back from you until May 23rd was the deadline that was reported, which is when they settled by, or agreed to the settlement terms by, we're going to go ahead and just slam this door and we're going to go to the trial. Everyone saw how the NCAA has been doing in courts recently, ever since that 9-0 Alston case in the Supreme Court. Even though it wasn't specifically on NIL or things like that, the NCAA has been very different since that case, because there were a couple of concurrences that were comments made by some of the justices, particularly Kavanaugh, that more or less said, we dare you to come back to this courtroom. And and the NCAA was like, all right, we're not going to get involved in this anymore. We're going to quietly settle these as much as we can. So it's not a done deal, though. It can be challenged, as there can be parties that perhaps some of the smaller conferences that are being asked to chip in money, even though they're like, what NIL money? No one gets NIL money in our conference. Like, we're the Pioneer Football League. Like, Valparaiso is not paying tons of money to their players to come play non-scholarship D1 football there. There's going to be potential for that. I mean, some of the D1 non-football schools are not really thrilled with that. Now, one of the counter arguments that have been pushed by the football programs and especially the P4 is like, all of us had to agree to these rules. We all enforced them, so we're all kind of part of it. I'm not saying that's the winning argument, but that's part of why this was kind of agreed to with some dissent, but no dissent that has turned into a lawsuit yet. It still could. This is not a court decision. This is not precedent. This is not something that will have the power of a judge ruling or a jury ruling. This is literally a privately agreed to contract that allows the parties to say, you know what, judge, forget about the trial. Majority of cases in law, like I teach torts, like car accidents, things like that, the law behind that. Most civil trials end in a settlement. Very few things go to trial. So things of this nature almost certainly get settled like this. It just means the court, yeah, they went through all the rigmarole, they had discovery, things like that, but it ultimately never went to trial. And that can be an important thing because, again, this does not have the same precedential value. It can be challenged like a contract in several ways. And even then, we haven't reached the point where the settlement is final. So they still have to figure out all the details of how it's going to be run. They need to work out how much money each school is going to pay its athletes. They have to figure out the impact on roster sizes. They have to figure out the role of NIL. There's some issues if they're kind of curious out there. Some of these players in basketball came up because a couple of the especially notable basketball players aren't American citizens, and they're here on like basically student visas. How does it work for them? Their rules for them are kind of different. Title IX is going to be a whole other kettle of fish. Does that mean they have to pay equally to men and women and across all sports? That'll be an interesting thing. So just to kind of give you a summary, this is a case that looks both in the past and the present/future. So in the past, it means they're going to be paying money to settle a class of athletes who were not able to get NIL money. Now, it only goes back, I believe, 4 years from the day NIL was enforced. That is because of a statute of limitations. Like at a certain point, you can't sue anymore. So it's all the people who were still within that time zone when they filed the lawsuit to be able to sue for those particular lost earnings. Now, that's the bulk of that $2.7 billion you've been hearing about. Of course, the lawyers, we're going to take our share. We like our pound of flesh, but it's going to go to those athletes. Prospectively, it means now, and this is where it gets a little dicey and could be challenged as a court of law. Basically, the settlement contemplates a salary cap system. So it means individual colleges that opt into this framework can pay players, and I mean all players across all sports, a combined amount up to about $21 million. Now, where does that money come from? I forgot. They think they clocked it on some of these some of the revenue they bring in, but it maxes out at $21 million. That doesn't mean Akron's going to suddenly be paying $21 million to its student athletes. They don't have the money. We're talking about this is probably going to only apply to the top of the P5 and the P4. It also means that they're going to probably set up some sort of similar system used by the NFL and NBA. They could end up hiring salary cap experts. It could be kind of interesting. And then the funny thing is, once they figure out all of these details, it still has to be approved by the judge. Now, I don't anticipate that happening. Oh God, there's no way this is happening before this upcoming season. All of this stuff at the earliest. Let's say people are working as aggressively as possible and somehow no major hangups occur, which, we'll see if that happens. This would at the soonest come into play in fall of 2025. And again, that would be extremely aggressive, which is code for like, wow, that would be incredible, almost unprecedented if they got this all into place. But if I was to give you my earliest thought, fall of 2025 is when we would see all of this come in. But again, there's 14,500 players that are going to be getting dollar amounts out of this as part of the settlement, the past students, and then all the ones that are going to be paid in the future. So again, this settlement only resolves 3 antitrust cases. So, for example, there's another one out there in the state of Colorado the U.S. District Court judge, which is like the trial level judge, not the judges, the appellate court judges who might, like that go up to the Supreme Court. She said, at least for now, the case in her courtroom is not part of this settlement. That could change once the settlement is finalized. She could say, okay, I agree. The judges get to decide this. We will put this case in that basket, and this case is going to be dismissed with the rest as part of that settlement. Courts can force that if they need to. Another example is that there is going to be the ongoing unionization effort at several schools. Dartmouth is, of course, taking the lead in all of this because of the men's basketball team. In that particular discussion, again, since there's no court precedent in this particular settlement discussion, they are still moving forward. The union representative representing the Dartmouth men's college basketball team, as well as about, I think, 500 other workers at Dartmouth, has said, we're not going to be part of this settlement yet. So that could be an interesting factor in all of this, because the NCAA partly wants to settle this case and look like they're being friendly about it, because they're still trying to get Congress to step in and try and create legislation that gives them an antitrust exception. Essentially, they're just still looking to try and get a Hail Mary so that they don't have to see players ruled as employees, because this settlement does not quite go that far. It's all about revenue sharing, paying students, athletes who were not here, who are not participating in NIL because they were not allowed to, but it still does not make anyone quite yet an employee. Realistically, their only chance of fighting that is getting the U.S. Congress to pass legislation. Realistically, and I've said this before, almost certainly not going to happen. When Senator Ted Cruz had a roundtable a few months ago, he said the chance of this occurring in this year, this legislative session, was 50-50. And that was the most generous number I've ever heard. But I mean, he had literally just called this big meeting, got to sit at a table with Nick Saban, got all the pictures. It wasn't realistic. The reason is, it's election year. And frankly, we've had 2 or 3 years of these proposals, and none of them have moved forward. There just isn't interest in Congress for this particular issue. I say that because it seems inevitable that we're going to get the players, ruled as employees, either through something like the NLRB, which would rule on this Dartmouth ruling about the unionization effort, or we're going to get a judge that's going to say, okay, wait. So you can pay them NIL. You can pay them all these things. Oh, and look at this. You've all settled this agreement that says that you're going to do revenue sharing with them. How are they not employees? So we're going to eventually, without any legislation, that moment is coming. It's coming probably in the next year. Every year, it just seems like we're on an exponential scale. We're accelerating towards this moment. So it is coming. I just want to be clear on that. I see a couple of people raise their hands, and I also see a couple of people want to join the conversation. So I'll promise to get to everybody here. Ski Masks Murphy, I saw your hand up. I'm going to let up College Football Lounge. I'm going to let up Dean Mullen. Lots of conversation here. This is kind of the meatiest topic going on right now. But yeah, Ski Masks Murphy, what's going on?
Big Ten backer had a
Oh, sure. Sorry, yeah, Big Ten backer. Go ahead.
Hey, man, I appreciate it. Thank you. I was just wondering, I don't see how college football survives if they become employees of the universities, just with benefits and everything else. They have to also get whatever type of state retirement funds that they would be getting. They get 4 years towards that. I don't know what that counts as. And then insurance on top of that. I don't know where all this money is going to come from if they become employees.
Yeah, it gets interesting, especially for the smaller programs. And that's the big question. Now, one of the more radical approaches, and I'm not saying people are going to do this, is shifting to a model where you make a lot of the non-revenue sports club sports, in which case you could still run them basically like the NCAA was running amateur sports, but they're no longer under the umbrella of the athletic department in the traditional sense. That is a classic route of trying to kind of solve a problem and kind of, going around it. Some programs will be able to do this all. Some programs may decide, like, which programs are we going to make varsity scholarship? Like, we're going to pay and give them all the benefit of that. Which sports do we truly care about? Which ones do we want to move to a little less emphasis? So we're going to, maybe they'll be allowed to still participate with the funded programs, but they're just not going to be on the same page. We'll be curious to see where that goes. Sometimes you get what happened at Stanford a couple of years ago, where Stanford, which has got like All the teams, like every team. That's why they're always competing for the athletic directors cup. They decided to try and cut some sports, and suddenly some of their, because it's Stanford, some of their alumni were like, no, here's a check, keep the team running. Here's an endowment for that sport. I'm not sure, but there's certainly going to be some very interesting decisions to be made. And I think you're absolutely right. There could be some sports cut. I don't think we're going to see an end of like college football, college basketball. They earn enough money. They'll be able to probably cover themselves to some extent. But where we're going to see the real blood shed is potentially the non-revenue sports, unless they come up with some interesting solution there.
And how do you think Title IX will react to this? Do you think they're going to cause that? That's going to destroy the programs, the non-revenue programs.
That's going to be $1 billion question, because there's going to be some lawsuits filed on that. No matter, unless they say they're going to just follow it, I think there could be a lawsuit almost certainly filed. Where it goes, I'm not sure, because there can be some interesting ways to get around it. I was reading, again, one of the best legal minds on this, who I always read to set my watch to as a lawyer, is Professor Michael McCann, who writes for Sportico. And he wrote, and he noted that, there have been Title IX challenges that have actually failed because courts have found, for example, conference funds have sometimes been ruled to not be applicable to Title IX. So if you fund the money sometimes in certain ways, it doesn't trip up the Title IX. Of course, that could be overruled in another case. But yeah, no, that is the biggest mystery of all. And I don't have an answer for it. I don't think anyone does at this point. Ski Master Murphy, your hands up, and I'd love to get to the two guys who just got up here.
Oh, there's a mute button. Unmute. Yeah, I was going to go in the same realm as Big Ten backers. That I feel that through reading what was written on ESPN and Yahoo Sports, because the NCAA, they did make an announcement on their organizational website page, but it had like nothing other than saying like, yeah, the power conferences and Notre Dame and the NCAA agree to like settlement terms, but it didn't really fully explain. But
and the reason is the details just aren't there. Like literally, they've agreed. They've just agreed enough to get the plaintiffs to forbear from continuing with the lawsuit as it was. I mean, they basically paused the lawsuit to now, okay, we've agreed in principle. We'll look at your terms. You've sent out these term sheets. Now let's negotiate the nitty gritty. So that's why it's so tentative now, because it could theoretically fall apart. I'm doubting that. There's too much at stake for the existence of so many entities, but we're going to see some push and pull because of the issues that you brought up. Maybe this is going to be something that could be an existential crisis for some of these programs, and some of these, especially from some of their non-revenue sports. Let's see here. I also love College Football Lounge. What's on your mind? Thank you for your patience.
Hey, good evening, Bob. Good evening, everybody. Yeah, I just wanted to say I saw some additional reporting. I believe it was from Ross Dellinger about the settlement. And I'd seen some sentiments on message boards in the wake of this settlement being announced along the lines of, oh, yay, the collective's dead now, the bag man's dead now. And from what I took from what Ross Dellinger was saying is that any idea of a salary cap would be strictly related to the revenue sharing piece of this.
Mm-hmm.
And then NIL would become sort of its own separate thing above and beyond that. So it's not a situation where, if you're just LSU, you're literally the most that you can pay your group of players is X amount, and there's no way to go above and beyond that. Is not actually how it would work out. They would get the revenue sharing piece, and then whatever your collective or collectives are able to raise, you could pay them above and beyond that for NIL payments, endorsements, so on and so forth. Is that your understanding of that as well?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I love that you brought that up, because that's one of the things I wanted to definitely touch on today. So Ross Dellinger is one of the best reporters in the business, particularly on this particular topic and anything involving administration stuff. I once read somebody insult him saying like, "Oh, he's just an NCAA water carrier." Like, what? First of all, understand how journalists work. Second of all, no, he's just good at reporting. So he actually conveys what one side is saying really well. And what you pointed out is absolutely true. The tweet, I actually have it handy. So looking at some of the new settlement documents, more on the quote economic incentive for schools to bring collectives in-house, they can increase the salary cap space by buying athletes' NIL rights and using those rights to generate third-party NIL, because third-party NIL does not count towards the cap. So what they're saying is, again, as you, I think, frankly, I think College Football Lounge put it better. The idea is that outside NIL will not count towards the salary cap. So this wouldn't necessarily eliminate NILs altogether. This would just sort of add another kind of revenue avenue, and one that the schools will have to take in some regard, but it wouldn't be a complete cap because the NILs would still be allowed to contribute funds. That honestly makes sense to me, only because if you start saying that, you're going to get challenged for restricting on athletes' abilities to contract. And that was part of what got us into this mess to begin with. The whole reason the NIL stuff came up is we were saying like, no, athletes can't negotiate for their name, image, and likeness. And that's we see where that turned up, and we know the courts are absolutely going to shoot anything down that sounds like we're trying to put a restriction on these guys from making any student athlete, because gosh knows, I mean, Caitlin Clark is a great example of it isn't just guys, who can contract out and have their own contracts in their own name. So that's the fundamental nature of capitalism. So if anything, we're forcing everyone to enjoy capitalism and all the fruits of it. Dean, you've been really patient as well. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good evening. I appreciate the education. My head's spinning a little bit, but it's good stuff. I had a little bit off topic. I was curious. A lot of people don't know the NFL was a nonprofit till about 2015, and I was curious. Obviously, I believe the NCAA is a nonprofit, and also the PGA Tour, if I'm not mistaken, is a nonprofit, which is interesting because with all the LIV stuff going on, and people leaving for money, more money, obviously. I was curious with the NCAA, if this is going to be a topic maybe 5-10 years down the line, with all this money going around with NIL and boosters getting involved. I was just curious to hear your answer on why did the NFL, in your opinion, turn from a nonprofit, reverse that profit nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
Tired. Thank you.
Well, it's interesting. I've never actually looked at what caused them to, but I could give you a good idea of where the NCAA would fall on that. So when we're looking at the way you maintain, because sometimes nonprofits, there's certain peculiar rules that go to them. Like I actually created a 501c3 for donating money for Reddit CFB. It's actually like we have two parallel organizations. I had to, and this will kind of explain a little bit of what goes on here. So, for example, if we want to donate money to a charity, but we got it from a sponsorship for a tweet, which we've done occasionally, I can't say that furthers a nonprofit. If I'm literally saying like, hey, DraftKings is cool, or, hey, go buy a shirt from Home Field Apparel. That isn't like, I can't, what am I going to say? That's helping a charity? That's nonsense. You could lose your 501c3 status, your nonprofit status. So we created an LLC, and then we just take that money and donate it to the 501c3. That's okay. We pay the taxes that come in into the LLC, and then the nonprofit gets its nonprofit status, non-taxable status, and boom. So going back to the NCAA, the question is, what are they doing? Is it furthering, at least the vast majority of the work, furthering things that go towards their nonprofit category? And they're obviously an organization for organizing sporting events, for universities. Universities are fairly safe. I mean, you can make there's lots of arguments that can be made for all the money that they make. But at the same time, they are still technically run as nonprofit institutions. it got to be that some of the for-profit schools, thinking of a couple that are playing in NAIA in Division II, and I think there's one now that's on a basketball-only Division I school that had historically been for-profit schools, that after they started to finally get busted down a little bit for some of their tactics, shifted themselves to clothe themselves in nonprofit status so they could avoid that kind of scrutiny. But going over, sorry, I'm getting really into the weeds on this because this is a very heavy topic. I love that you brought it up, but it's a really heavy topic. Um, with the NCAA, what they do, and we have to remember the majority, they have so many members. We always think of just the P4, maybe some of the rest of D1. They have all of D2, they have all of D3. Those programs are not rolling in dough. They literally are just hoping the NCAA can help them organize stuff, help them with administration, keep an even playing field. Oh, and by the way, maybe cut them some checks from that sweet NCAA tournament, and the other tournaments they run. Because of that, that's part of the reason why I don't think the NCAA itself is in any danger now. One thing that started to happen, although a lot of these folks have been smart about the attorneys they hire to create their documents, NILs themselves have been kind of a mixed bag. Believe last January there was a report that finally one of the NILs was ruled to not be a nonprofit because they were all filing themselves as nonprofits. Like, oh yeah, we're charitable institutions. This kid we're paying an enormous sum of money, occasionally does a Zoom with kids in a hospital, hey, nonprofit, that kind of nonsense. A couple of them have run into some scrutiny on that, and some of them are very good and will probably stay nonprofits. That is going to be a little bit more of an interesting firing line. Universities in general, athletic departments, the portions of it that are within a nonprofit status, you can't, and it's so funny. There's another nonprofit I'm on the board of, and we're not like a big one, but I remember our bless the accountants. They are always the best people in any board. If you are an accountant or if you decide to go into accounting, you will always find charitable boards that will love to have you on them because that is the hardest thing to find. But setting that aside, he always tells us like, we've got too much money in the bank. We've got to do something with it because a lot of charities are not allowed, or nonprofits are not allowed to hold on to much money. So that's why athletic departments are always, when they ever see their numbers, even if the team is making hands over fists, they're spending a ton. It's part of the reasons you're kind of obligated to, right? So that's part of the money that was going into, all right, the arms race that we were having, that's probably going to slow down now that money's going to get diverted to paying the revenue sharing that we're seeing now. But again, Dean, you brought up a huge question, but those are kind of the factors and why I'm not sure we're going to see those particular protections eroded. And I don't know if the NCAA would want to. I think they're still very interested in remaining a nonprofit because I think their mission, particularly to the D2 and D3, if anything, what could happen, and it's something that's been discussed, is we could see the P4 and Friends, Notre Dame, a couple of the other teams decide to just form an entirely new league for whatever reason, and they would leave the NCAA behind so that they could create rules that fit their financial wherewithal. And in which case, the NCAA would probably still stay the way they are and just manage all the other teams because that's what they're good at. But that's what their specialty is. And I think they're not going to change that because their mission is still fairly close to what it was in the beginning. That was a really long answer. I apologize. Ski Mask, your hands up. I wasn't sure if it was for this or if you'd left it up from that earlier comment.
Oh, it was up from my earlier comment. I had to re-raise it again because I was gonna talk about the whole salary cap
Sure,
thing.
go ahead.
How I felt about it because with Title IX, if Title IX comes into play with the salary cap, I, I even with the extra NIL money, it can only happen with the extra NIL money just because it's sort of been the cat sort of been let out the bag. Because independently on my own, I had researched it for like years of like trying to figure out how much players were getting paid under the table for a very long time, and the numbers sort of came out. Adjusting for inflation now, like going all the way back to like the 70s and 80s with Eric Dickerson and like the gold Trans Am through Cam Newton up to basically for NIL. It seemed like the going rate for like those Heisman hopeful first round draft pick type guys on offense, particularly quarterbacks and running backs, were going for like around 300,000 to like 500,000, and then sort of like NIL came in, and now those guys, from what I would say, I have a reliable source who's giving me information. Those guys now go around for like 7 to 10 million. So with the salary cap, it's sort of like it's gonna still have to have NIL, because telling a guy who, like we saw with Jaden Rashada, who was promised $10 million, telling if he did get that money, telling the guy who's making $10 million, and telling the guy behind us like, hey, now we got a salary cap. You can't get the 10 million he did, because we can't literally blow the whole school's budget on half the school's budget on one guy. It's gonna sort of be like, yeah, you're gonna have to calm it down, because certain places are gonna have even women athletes who are gonna blow things out of the water, similar to a Caitlin Clark. Because right now, look at USC, and now they have Juju Watkins for women's basketball. It's like, you have 3 more seasons of her. If you had a salary cap for 3 seasons with her, there's going to be a quarterback at USC who's going to be pretty ticked off, because he's like, I have to get paid less for the school to be able to account for her.
Yeah,
And so I think
go
the only way it works is to have NIL on top of
Yeah,
it,
I agree.
as the way college football
I think
is.
that's why third-party NIL will probably still be allowed to just kind of throw whatever money they need to on top of it. And that would be something that would, exactly, as we were talking about, that's why they're not going to probably restrict that ability for athletes to make those contracts separate from whatever the revenue sharing is. I think the revenue sharing is going to probably benefit more of the athletes who just weren't getting anything from out of this, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that, at least if it goes to some of them as well. And a sort of a parallel conversation. And this is something, again, I was talking about Ross Dellinger. He did some good reporting on this, and it's been discussed and mislabeled by, I think, accident by a lot of folks, because it's a confusing term because it's similar to another term. So, Drew Weatherford, former quarterback, has been holding apparently clandestine meetings, so under the table, with up to 50 programs in FBS, talking about trying to offer funds. Now, it's been misreported and sometimes even misposted that this is a private equity thing. It isn't. It's private capital, and that's a difference I'll get to in a second. So the reason this is attractive is, with revenue sharing looming and the potential, like, how ruinous could this be, or some of these teams might need money in a hurry. Apparently, there are ADs, athletic directors out there, who are listening fairly intently to this overture for this private capital plan that could see an infusion of $50 to $20 million for some of these schools. The quote saying, like, is this what you need to survive? Asks one AD, and the answer was yes. So how does that work? What is the difference? So private equity has a bad rap for probably good reason, because it can affect companies pretty negatively. Private equity, somebody goes like, okay, I'm going to just throw a random number out there. Here's $100 million. I get to have a stake in your company, a financial stake of equity in the ownership of the company, which means not only can I, and probably some extra voting rights, so I can make decisions that might be to the detriment of the organization, because I have control of it, I have ownership of it. Private capital is a little different. Here's $100 million because I think this is going to improve your revenue. Oh, and by the way, for the next X number of years, I will get a 20% share of your revenue that comes in, because I think it's going to increase. So that'll be an interest. And then after a certain amount of time, it'll go a little bit lower until I get my investment back plus interest. So it doesn't an ownership stake. It doesn't necessarily mean the people throwing money at it are going to say, like, oh, I own a share of the team, you have to do what I have to say. It's a little different than that. It's more akin to a bank loan, but slightly different. I'm not sure where that would go. I'm not sure the value of it. It is a little less onerous than private equity, but I'm only saying that because sometimes these conversations have been coming up in the past week. There's some, again, Ross, a couple of others have been reporting on it, and I just wanted to be clear the difference between a private capital plan versus a private equity plan. So if you're starting to hear these conversations of schools taking a bunch of money, it's a private capital thing. Still not particularly great, still risk, still kind of unprecedented. But one thing that could be interesting, depending on how that works out. Let me see here. I see one other person wants to join us. Let's go ahead. Let's let up Randolph. Randolph, when you get up here, just feel free to hit unmute. Would love to hear from you. What's on your mind? once you get up here. And then I've got a couple of other things. By the way, one more thing I wanted to mention, just because Colorado, credit to Coach Sanders, they apparently have a cumulative GPA above 3.0 for the first time ever among the team. So who knew? Who knew? Academically, there you go. Did not, didn't expect that. Or maybe they just saw all the players that were bringing down the GPA transfer out. I have no idea. Who knows with them. But Randolph, what's on your mind? Feel free to hit unmute. It's in the bottom left. And Randolph, whatever you can, just feel free to hit unmute. Would love to hear from you. Let's see here. Well, when he hits unmute, we'll hear from him. No, not a big deal. Sometimes we run into all of these things. It's interesting. We were talking about SEC spring meetings, some of the quotes coming out of it. Texas A&M AD Trev Alberts. It's still weird to say that. He said, we've always had enough increasing revenue to overcome dumb expenses. I've said it 100 times, and I'll say it again. We don't have a revenue problem in college athletics. We have an expenses problem. Sorry. So apparently Texas A&M certainly doesn't have a revenue problem for sure. But the joke is, talking about dumb expenses. Some fans, including a Texas fan, Czar CW, I'm going to credit him on this one. This is the dude that couldn't wait an extra week to fire Scott Frost and save $10 million. Yeah, same guy. Same guy. Ski Master Murphy, your hand's still up, so I wasn't sure if you wanted to jump in on this as well.
Well, I guess the program's being weird. My hands are not up.
I could see that. This program has occasionally, absolutely, but I see Big Ten backers. You just put yours up. So what's on your thought?
Hey, I want to piggyback on the last topic with NIL and scholarship limits. There was some talk of how certain programs would offer people large NIL packages, but non-scholarship, so that they could get under the scholarship limit. Is that something that you know of that's going on for sure?
Oh yeah, that's been kind of that's been a fascinating thing that's been coming to light. So it was a great way to avoid scholarship limits by simply using NIL on walk-ons, who were the people we knew as walk-ons are actually getting paid. So it almost goes back to the old days of stacking your roster, hiding talent when there were unlimited scholarships. Of course, one of the side conversations in all of this settlement is it may lead to the elimination of walk-ons. And that's something that a lot of coaches are not happy with that idea. But it could happen. Again, there's so much that needs to still be worked out on the details of this settlement. We're almost certainly going to see leaks. Because one thing is remarkable, and again, going back to an earlier article, I think from last month, earlier this month, from Michael McCann, it is very unusual for settlement talks to be so public. But I think the problem is you have all these universities. A lot of people are not necessarily even savvy in complex negotiations, and so they just love leaking things. So guys like Ross, guys like other reporters keep getting these documents that are telling them what's going on, and quiet comments about people's thoughts on this and some public thoughts on these issues. So there's lots of ways that could turn out. College Football Lounge, I saw your hand go up, and then Ski Master Murphy as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on that comment just now about using NIL money basically to take players as preferred walk-ons that in the past you might not have been able to take because of the scholarship limits. And one thing that Oklahoma's been doing, I'm an Oklahoma fan, live in Oklahoma, since Brent Venables became the head coach, is they've been doing exactly that with some in-state players that they've been taking as preferred walk-ons. And presumably they're able to do that now because they're able to fund them using NIL money instead of scholarships. When in the past they wouldn't have been able to take those guys and they would have ended up at a different university. That's great for Oklahoma. Perhaps not so great for the universities who used to end up with those players, but that's absolutely happening. Probably at a number of universities right now, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you, and I think it's been. I don't know if it's even a secret. It's become open knowledge for sure. Ski Mask, what's on your thoughts?
I don't know why the
Oh,
program
dang
did
it!
again.
Yes,
My hand's
sorry,
not up, but I do have
but
something
I
to
do have
say.
thoughts. I do have thoughts.
I thoughts. I'm a thinking man. I was gonna say you do have a point with the leaks and reporters getting all this information because normally very large settlements are between two groups realistically, or maybe a handful, like five or six. This in reality, people think is the NCAA versus the players, but it's the NCAA is what, almost 500 universities. So you have 500 different organizations comprised with who knows how many people actually interacting with these negotiations. The leaks are going to slowly come out. It's one of those things where it's just too many people involved and it's just going to leak out. I mean, it's almost the equivalent of like how in DC you have the pizza meter. So this is NCAA's pizza
Now,
meter. It's all going to
I
slowly
have to
leak out.
say, you're actually low by half. There's over 1,000 NCAA institutions, so that's why they're tiny schools in all corners of the United States that are like watching this go down and like, oh, what's this mean for my tiny college? And that's what we forget, and
Yeah.
that's why, for example, going back to that earlier comment that we had. That's why I think the NCAA isn't in any interest in backing away from its nonprofit status or nonprofit, because they're really kind of they have a duty to all of those other schools, and they're just kind of being dragged into all of this because of the largest programs that they help regulate, and are basically kind of doing it at their pleasure. I mean, the NCAA is operating on what the schools want in all of this. So yeah, it's fascinating stuff. And all of it. Well, you know what? We're coming up at almost 90 minutes. So typically these go for about an hour. This has been a really weird off season. Like last off season, it was much more quiet. So these go for about 30 minutes. Here we are in May, usually the quietest of all months, and we're still going on for 90 minutes. So I'm going to go ahead and slowly wrap this up. I just wanted to mention next week we're probably not going to have a show. I think I'm going to be on a plane next Tuesday night, so we'll probably take a week and a half, 2 weeks off or 1 week off, however that works. Bad with math. That's why I became a lawyer. But we'll come back and we'll have more to talk about. Who knows what'll happen? But my name is Bobak Ha'Eri. This was our CFB Talk 195. I always appreciate when you come and join us to listen to what you all have to say, talk about whatever you all want to talk about. I love this sport. I know all of you do too if you're following this on again in May in the college football universe. But again, other than next week, we do these every Tuesday night. This will automatically turn into a recording. I'll take the audio, put it up on wherever you get your podcasts is our CFB Talk. I've even started figuring out how to get the video off of this and putting it on YouTube. But if you really feel like you want to go back and listen to it, but again, if you want to hear what else I do the College Football Survivor Show with CBS Sports Shahan Jayaraja. That's more of a formal podcast. I do that for the Advanced Media Newspaper Group. It's like AL.com, Cleveland.com, Syracuse.com, like a bunch of, you've heard of all their websites if you're in college football anyway. So you can hear that. But otherwise, on behalf of everyone at our CFB, thank you all. Now I'm hang up and listen.